Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
Campaign culture is just, it's not a good culture, right? I mean, there's so many things that need to be changed about it. And so much of it is putting on a show and on a face, and that there isn't room for error. And like having Tourette's is not error, right? At least we all know that, but in our mind is like, oh, that is error, so I'm going to hide it.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Such a great episode here. This is episode 15 of season 6, which means we are one away from the season finale. And I can't believe how well this season has gone, and that's all thanks to you and the guests that we've had on this season, and the feedback and the guidance. And yes, I realized that I misspelled the word scholastic when I tried to be helpful by spelling out the URL of the website that you should visit to apply for scholarships for Tourette students. Please visit scholasticsupport.org. scholasticsupport.org. Okay, scholasticsupport.org. That's the website for Scholastic Tourette Supporters, who are supporting Tourette's podcast, and you can support them. If you visit scholasticsupport.org, you'll see where you can apply for a scholarship if you're a student with Tourette Syndrome. You'll also see a place where you can donate to this great organization, which has a GuideStar Platinum rating, which means they're fiscally transparent, they're a trustworthy organization. Spell it correctly, remember the name, scholasticsupport.org, and I'll link to it once again in the notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. Thank you to Scholastic Tourette Supporters. Let's play something from the answering machine here.
Hi, I'm a new listener, and I'm starting to catch up. I'm at episode 7 of your first season, and I'm going to be listening to all of these in a row. I'm a parent of a diagnosed children of Tourette, and up to about a month ago, I did not know much about Tourette. The diagnostic came in maybe a week ago, and we've started to get more information. And my question is, what is the best way to tell my son what he has? He's 8 years old right now. He knows something is wrong. I just don't know how to go about it yet. And we're at that critical moment where I am starting to know more about this, and I don't know how to go about it. But we know we have to talk to him about it soon, fast. So hoping that by the time you air this, I have caught up. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, so that's from a parent named Yvonne. So I handed that question over to the parents in the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, since I'm not a parent myself. This question got a lot of feedback, and there's not time to read all of them, but here's a few responses. Jerry says, I think being direct and non-judgmental is a good approach. I assume the kid knows that he or she tics, so, quote, we found out why you do your tics. It's something called Tourette Syndrome. It means your brain makes your body do these things, end quote. And then as much talking about the good and the bad of it as they want. Okay, here's another response. Often parents project their concerns onto their kids, but a young child isn't feeling the loss, sadness, and guilt that the parent is feeling. They may be frustrated and irritated that they have these unexplainable impulses, and get angry that they can't control it. In general, present as much information as they want in an age-appropriate manner. Keep your sadness to yourself. Let them have their feelings. And just comfort them. Don't promise that they will outgrow it, because you don't know. Don't pretend that no one notices. Just focus on accepting and tell them, we are going to deal with this together. And here's a follow-up from the same parent. She says, another important thing is to tell their teacher near the beginning of the school year about TS. The teachers often have little experience with it. Explain that they have tics and how they usually manifest, how your child prefers to deal with it, suggestions for seating, how it feels, like an itch that needs to be scratched. and why it is so exhausting. Understand that the child likely holds back in school as much as they can, and then at home, they let loose. It will interfere with getting homework done. Also, in elementary school, it is good to send in a children's book about a kid with TS so the teacher can read it to the class. When the TS is obvious, the other kids will point it out, and it really helps to explain why Johnny can't stop the noises. Another parent says, oddly perhaps, my son was thrilled to find out there was actually a thing called Tourette's. He then said, that's one more way I'm unique. Since then, he has struggled more with OCD, but is getting a hold on that by going through a very good workbook made for teens with OCD. There's so many good responses here. Here's one more. Keep it factual and to the point. Let the child know that you're in this together and both of you will learn about TS together. Remind the child that any and all questions are welcome, and though there may be things you don't want to know, you'll help them to find out. And there's a lot more in the discussion group, so head over there to read more. You should join it if you haven't already. It's a closed discussion group, so you have to request permission to join, and there's a set of questions you have to answer. These are mandatory. You got to answer these questions to get in. It's just our way of making sure that, you're a real human being with sincere intentions. Sophia, the admin of the group, will give you a welcome. New members to thank this week include Danielle, Andrew, Peter. That's actually Peter Zhao, who has a post up now at tourettespodcast.com, following up on a recent political figure's comments about Tourette Syndrome, or making a joke out of it. Peter wrote something about how that made him feel, and kind of put in context to what a Tourette joke really means. Also thanks to new member Chris, and I think that's all we got this week. Thanks for being part of the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. You can leave your questions there for other people in the group to answer. You can also send me questions to read on the podcast. Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com. Speaking of questions, what are your burning science questions about Tourette Syndrome? A lot of you have sent me science questions, and I really want to get to these. So you sending me science questions is going to help me and the science team put something together for a future episode. For example, you might ask a Tourette scientist, what happens in the brain when we tick? Or what do we know about the causes of Tourette Syndrome? And those sound like really basic questions, but we often hear people say things in the community like, not much is known about Tourette Syndrome, or it's a total mystery that science still hasn't figured out, which is actually not true. There's a lot we know about Tourette, and I want to introduce you to more of the scientists who are doing this really remarkable work in the field of Tourette Syndrome, and what it is, and what the best therapies are, etc. Sometimes you donate money to Tourette research, and I'd like to do more to share exactly what the researchers are doing, and have done already, to help us understand Tourette better. So send me an email, tourettespodcast@gmail.com, or use the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. And send me one or two Tourette science questions that you have that you'd like to know the answer to, or at least get a better idea of where the science is on that question. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Your science questions, please send them in. One of the last times we had a Tourette scientist on, we talked about anxiety, the science of anxiety and depression, and what's going on in the brain. What's the evolutionary purpose of anxiety? And that was a really interesting talk. That was episode 5 of season 5 with Dr. John Walkup. Anxiety and fear, and the things it can make us do or not do, is a recurring thing in this episode with our guest, Eli, who works in the world of American politics. This is a fast-talking episode, and a lot of fun, and I think a lot to relate to. So Tourette's Podcast takes no partisan stance on anything, but we do slap the hand of Texas Senator Ted Cruz along the way in this discussion for his really lame use of Tourette Syndrome and his insulting exchange with actor Seth Rogen. I'm not going to repeat what Senator Cruz said, you can look it up, but it was lame. Seth Rogen, by the way, revealed after that comment from Cruz that Tourette is in his family, in Seth Rogen's family, and that he has a quote-unquote mild version of it himself. And yes, the votes are in. I would love to get Seth Rogen on the podcast. That's for later. Right now, enjoy the best part of episode 15 of season 6, talking with Eli Stone. Enjoy.
Yeah, my name is Eli Stone. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I am 18 years old, currently in a gap year between high school and college. And I am working on political campaigns. I've been working on campaigns for the past really 5 years now, and really fell in love with it. And the reason I'm here today is because I was diagnosed with Tourette's when I was about 8 years old, and found this podcast and thought it was really cool and wanted to come on and talk more about it.
That's awesome. So I'm really intrigued about the political stuff because that overlaps in what I do for a living. So I do multimedia and photography and podcasting and all that, but a lot of it steps into political advocacy and legislative agendas and things like that. What kind of politics do you do? Is it like state legislative, federal, local government? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything. So I got into it in a weird way. I was a freshman in high school, actually. And I went to a small school in a suburb of Chicago. And I was trying to, adjust. I was new to school, obviously. I was a freshman. One of my history teachers got up and we had these things called community meeting, and it was basically a morning assembly. And she said there's a local mayoral race for mayor of Evanston. Evanston's the town that I went to school in. And they're looking for interns. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, no, like I can't do that. I'll never be, able to do that. My sister, who's 2 years older than me, really pushed me and encouraged me to get into it. So I applied. I started interning on the local mayoral race, and then there's a lot of different things that have happened from then till now, which we can definitely get into. But I really fell in love with it, and I've worked on campaigns from as small as Lake County Board in a suburb of Chicago, mayor's race for Evanston, which is a smaller town. It's a college town. For Lord Lightfoot, who's now the Chicago mayor. I worked on her campaign. I worked on some gubernatorial races, and then a bunch of state legislative races as well. So kind of all over the map, and in 2 states, in Wisconsin and in Illinois now. So a little bit of everything kind of in there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think when I first got into that kind of work, so I was a journalist for a long time, and I covered politics. I covered North Carolina's governor and the state legislature.
Gotcha.
And it's from that job, I crossed over to what you call the dark side, which is you stop being a reporter and you join one of these organizations, and and I kind of do the same thing I did as a journalist, but I'm just kind of one-sided now because I'm writing for an advocacy group. But you definitely see the appeal of that kind of work because it's so fast-paced, and a lot of it does kind of sync up with almost the sense of chaos that can come with Tourette in the brain and all the things that come with it. And with me, so I would be writing on these deadlines, and it would be in the legislative building, and there's clamor everywhere, and it's tense stuff. It's like you write the wrong thing and someone's mad at you, even if you're accurate, and so it's really tense. And I would be ticking like crazy when I would send in my stories to the editors. I think just out of anxiety and worry, and sort of crossing over and doing the kind of work I'm doing now. It's way more laid back, but the sort of sense of the tension is kind of still there in terms of, we got to get it right. We're messaging something. If we slip up and we say the wrong thing, then, and I'm kind of like a mouthpiece for the people I work for. And so the pressure's on with that, but it's so addictive at the same time, just because it's so fast paced and things change all the time. And somehow just that sense of chaos really works for me. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's I try to describe it to friends who don't work in politics, or really just say, I know who doesn't work in politics, and you can't really understand it until you do it.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's fascinating because in my mind, especially when I was a freshman and younger, one of the things that held me back, and one of my initial thoughts of, why I can't do that is because, for me, a lot of my tics for me manifested in, anxiety about, what if I tick? What if that looks like? And also, I have a very mild case, right? They really don't affect me. I mean, they do affect me, obviously, but they don't affect me. I'm really able. They don't affect me on the day to day. Obviously, there's some ways, but I can get through the day without it being a major burden in my life. Which again, I feel really lucky to have found a way to manage them. But they definitely, when I was younger, they definitely got in the way in my mind in a way of thinking, like I can't do X, Y, and Z because of this.
Yeah.
And so, political campaigns were never something I thought I'd be able to do.
Yeah.
And what I found actually, and weirdly enough, because my biggest fear being when I was younger is like the days being too long and me having to, suppress tics for all day and that being really tiring. And now, like, I can't stop working until like the clock hits midnight, right? It's just like there's something about it that's become so addictive and so, and not in a healthy way. Like, I wouldn't suggest working in politics to many people. But it's something that I think now it's almost the reverse for me, where when I don't have a campaign and when I'm not, occupied 24/7, my tics are actually worse because I have more time to think about it.
Yeah.
And so it's become this weird kind of necessary evil, I would say.
Yeah.
That has, it is just kind of a part of my life. And again, like when I've found that I've had like a month or two breaks between campaigns. And those have been some of the hardest months with tics for me, just because of, my brain just didn't have something to focus on.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. It's, so when I was a reporter, it was around the clock. It was nonstop. And when I joined the government affairs group that I work with now, it's way more laid back, and I can predict my day a lot better. I can stop working at 5 a lot of the times, which was impossible for me before. And so when I started Tourette's podcast, it was actually at that time, like basically coinciding with me going to this new job that opened up some free time for me. And I just filled it in as quickly as I could, because I had the opportunity to do something like this now. Right. But I remember when I did start the podcast, and I've said this on the podcast before, that I told my bosses as kind of like a courtesy, because, and I guess you'll get this, working in a political field or a government space, there's so much to do with image and, and appearance and being credible and looking like you're on the level and everything like that. And I had all kinds of fears and anxiety that I wasn't, that, I was going to tick and be a weirdo and, all that stuff. Right. I mean, did you kind of turn that over in your mind of like, do I belong here? Because what if I make this candidate look weird or bad? And I'm not saying like you would or that's right, but it is the kind of mind game that you can play with yourself.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I definitely, I will say that like the first few campaigns I was on, I was an intern. And so a lot of my role was like, being an intern. And so like picking up things from the office and putting the yard signs in and making calls here and there. But as I've really progressed, and, about a year ago now, I was a communications director for a state rep he's no longer a state rep, Yoni Pizer. He was running, he got appointed to a seat and was running for a permanent position. And it was one of the closest watch races in the state. And as a comms director, one of my main roles was just interacting with the press. And that was the first time where my sole role was to deal with press. And, I would get on calls, or I would, get up at some of our events. And it was definitely something that it surprised me. I didn't think about it as much as I thought I would, but the anticipation and the anticipation of things have always just been the worst part for me.
Yeah, totally.
But the anticipate, it actually didn't affect me that bad. But what I did see is that afterwards, I would always second guess. And I said, "Oh, did that happen? Did that happen? Did I take it?" And trying to be like figuring it out. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I found is once you keep doing it, I found ways to kind of like make my tics look like something else if I needed to, or just simply like hold it in and not tick if I absolutely need to. But again, just the constant reminder in your mind of what if, it was definitely a hard hurdle to get around, and honestly still comes up, here and there on campaigns as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to not think about and really ultimately get over. I mean, I'm over it as much as I think I possibly could be, but if I'm in, say, like a meeting with the board of directors of our organization, which is made up of elected officials, municipal officials,
right?
I don't want to. They're doing busy work. I don't want to steal, the focus or, And this is this kind of thing where it's kind of like a dicey conversation of, I'm just being me and I can't help it. Yeah. But I'm still kind of conscious of how I might interrupt business. And in the perfect world, everybody would get it and be kind of tolerant. But because we're not in the perfect world, my nerves will kind of flare up about that. And, totally. I think a couple of them might know that I have Tourette just in the course of conversation or something, but for the most part, they don't. And it's not the kind of thing where I'm going to like, jump out in front of everybody and tell them, this is what I got. It'll come up as it comes up. But it definitely kind of, I don't know, it psychs me out a lot to be around successful people who I need to appeal to. And I'm sure that they would all understand, but what if,
Yeah. No, and I really relate to the whole like, a lot of sometimes people in my family are people that know it, and really I don't like advertise that I have Tourette's, and it's not out of shame. It's just simply out of it's something that I've managed, and again, like you just said, I really relate to you saying like it's not something that I need to like jump out and say, hey, I have this, right? If it comes up in conversation, it comes up in conversation, and I think a lot of people that know I do are like, oh, why don't you talk about it more? And I'm like, it's just I don't feel like I need to.
Yeah.
But I will say in that like campaign culture is just it's not a good culture, right? I mean, there's so many things that need to be changed about it, and so much of it is putting on a show and on a face, and that there isn't room for error. And like having Tourette's is not error, right?
Right.
At least we all know that, but in our mind is like, oh, that is error, so I'm going to hide it. And of course, like any person when they're talking to a reporter, you don't want to have to, I don't have that many vocal tics now, but like if I did, like I would obviously not want to do that because I'm talking on the record for my candidate and being their spokesperson. And so I obviously wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, that would be okay. And I think that there's a lot of room, and I've experienced a lot in campaigns. There's just a lot of room for campaign culture and especially government culture, because it doesn't stop after the campaign ends, to just be more accepting of people. And I think that, I'm a diehard Democrat. I think it's more for I think like the Democratic Party and Democrats as a whole are more accepting of it. But I got to say, like, there's still so much of you got to be perfect all the time, and that it doesn't leave room for people to be like, their authentic self when working for their candidates, which is a real issue.
Well, it's just occurring to me as we're talking, and I guess I'll make this a pitch right now. The National Day of Advocacy is coming up for the Tourette Association, where they're going to be scheduling meetings with people who sign up and they're a member of Congress or congressional staff, to just put a face with the disorder and, not just be the numbers, not just be the statistics or whatever. Every congressional district has statistically a number of people with Tourette.
Right.
We could be talking to these people head on and, and kind of relating as people. And so that's something coming up that, if you go to Tourette.org and click attend an event, it's in the calendar there. And I'm gonna be speaking at part of this, but just a reminder for people listening. Have you run into anybody else, like, in the course of your career who you can relate to in this regard, or anybody who has Tourette or something that's kind of a comorbid to it, or
that's a great
or have you run into many people at all in your life who have it?
I definitely have. I think there were some kids in my elementary school class that had it, or one kid. I'm not remembering. But honestly, no. I think I kind of have a weird thing where I can like kind of tell. I don't know if you can see this, like when you like look at someone, you can like sometimes tell. And I think when people look at you sometimes tell. So like right. I have thoughts of people that might, but I haven't, had that conversation of, oh, I have this, you have this type thing. No, I really haven't. I mean, I know I have, right? But I just haven't had those conversations. Again, it's really not something that I'm very public about. So I haven't been like out there as much and talking about it, but I'm sure that if I was, a lot of people around me, again, statistically would have had it as well.
So, in your personal life with your friends and everything, is this something they know about you, or is it like, I guess the way I was, where I just never talked about it?
It really depends. I think some of my very close friends do. But also I think some of my friends who consider me very close friends wouldn't. I mean, and not that they're not close friends, but it's just I don't talk about it with other people. I would say like 2 to 3 of my very close friends know. And again, and it's always been like this throughout, elementary school when I was diagnosed at 8, and throughout elementary school, all throughout high school, now into, my campaign world. I would say a few of my campaign friends do know, just because what I found is that I felt more comfortable when I'm spending a lot of time with someone if they knew it. And so, I told like some of my very close friends, I told, people that I've dated, I've told, some people that I work with, really day to day on long stretches of campaigns. But again, that list maybe totals 5, and I like maybe. And so it's really been something that I've kept to myself for a very long time.
When were you diagnosed again?
Yeah, I was diagnosed at about 7 or 8 years old. So my again, I remember like weird pictures in my mind of when my parents told me we had a flood in our apartment. So we're living in a hotel at the time. And so it's just like a weird memory of like where we were. But my parents remember kind of noticing me, kind of like do a little like hum and just, some weird things, and they're not weird, but, at the time my parents were like, oh, what's going on there? With my legs. And I think we were in London, like at the Sound of Music, and I couldn't stop doing it. And they're like, hey man, like, can you stop doing that? Like, you're disrupting the show. And I just couldn't start. And, my mom's a psychologist. My dad's he's a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. So they had a feeling that there was something going on. And so then I think they took me to get tested probably soon after we got back. And then I think it took I think they were just talking to them earlier. They needed the psychiatrist, whoever did the test, needed like 6 months to see if it continued or not. And then they diagnosed me there. But I remember being on the floor of the hotel and they gave me this book. I forgot what the book is called, but it was like a children's book about Tourette. And so, yeah.
So you said your dad worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there was a sympathetic mind or mentality in the house.
Yeah, there was. I mean, he's a lawyer by training as well. But he got into DEI, I think, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago now. I could be like completely wrong. But yeah, my parents they definitely based on their life experience as well. They definitely kind of knew what was something was going on.
That's interesting. Did that, I guess in my case, my parents, this was the mid 1980s, so it was more exploratory for them, and Tourette was something they had never heard of, and we all kind of, I guess, had to kind of learn it together through me. And we interacted with the Tourette Association at the time, but it was definitely not the kind of thing where you could go and Google and get a package of knowledge. This was just pure exposure. What was it like? I mean, in terms of, and I assume you might be too young to remember. Well, do you remember becoming conscious of what Tourette was? I mean, do you have a memory of that being like, okay, so this is what this is. This is what this means for my life.
Quite honestly, no. I think actually after I started listening to your podcast, I've been able to kind of like recall times where I've remembered it. I'm gonna have this weird remembrance of sitting on the floor of the hotel and like looking at that book and being like, oh, I have this. Yeah. But I don't really remember the like, realization in my mind where I was like, oh, that thing that I'm doing is this. Necessarily.
That's the thing that I'm kind of checking myself on, because I feel like since I started the podcast and had these conversations, so many memories have come up. Like just so many things have come forward where like, okay, I remember this, or I remember this one person treating me weirdly, or whatever it is. But memory is such a faulty, like fallible thing. And
totally.
I don't know if I'm taking other people's experiences and coloring in my own or what, but it has, at least, if I'm not producing perfectly accurate memories, I am producing accurate feelings and things I can relate to. And, even though I can't remember it dawning on me, I remember talking about Tourette when I was a little kid, but the context was different. It was in my house, and I had never heard of it like on TV until this 2020 special. And I related to it, but I didn't, I guess, know where it was headed in terms of, society and how it views it and the comedy routine and all that stuff.
Right.
But it has always been there, though, as something at the front of my mind that I did feel a little bit different about, even not having too much of a frame of reference for what normal is for other kids in my neighborhood or whatever at school. But what about when you did get to school? Was this something that you got accustomed to kind of covering up, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to a very small, Jewish day school. There were 16 kids in my class. And we were really a very tight knit community. And I'm still friends with really just a few people from there, but we've grown apart, but I'm still close. I'm still in the community. And I was a very shy kid growing up. I have one of my close friends now who is actually from that school. It's very weird for her to see me like talking on behalf of politicians, because she was like, you didn't talk when you were younger.
Yeah.
And so, I think the adjustment to school was really hard for me. I think, I was very comfortable at my school. My parents actually helped found it. It's, it was a newer school at the time. I had really good friends. I had amazing teachers. I had a great support system. And I was comfortable, but I was also kind of like, I was young and I was like trying to discover what this new thing with me was. And so again, I was young. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember like distinct things of like always wanting to sit in the corner of the classroom, in the front corner of the classroom, because I also at the time I had ADHD. I've since grown out of that. Or actually, I think just ADD. I don't think I had the H part. I like to say that. And I think I always want to sit at the front corner of the classroom because the front would like help me focus, but also if I was on the corner, no attention would be drawn to me. And so I could kind of like do what I needed to do in terms of like kind of on the side. I like vaguely remember that. My parents have kind of talked to me about that. But I will say like, I definitely remember, I think 4th and 5th grades, actually fifth grade was a very hard year for me. I actually for some reason, I had a teacher that I just really didn't like. And it was just kind of, 5th grade, just like a year, a lot of things are changing.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a really hard year for me, specifically in terms of Tourette's. And what I saw is that year was really when my Tourette's and anxiety really kind of teamed up to be a big pain for me. And I think there were days where I was so scared of Tourette's that it made it hard to go to school. I was so scared of the days lasting long and having to hold in my tics that it made it hard to go to school. And what was interesting about it and looking back at it is because like, I think in my whole life, someone has made a comment to me about it once or twice. Like it's really not something that I think others notice. Obviously, I think more people have noticed and they make comments, but I think, it's just really something that's not that visible for me. But I think in my mind, I hyped it up so much, which caused my mind to just, fully spiral with all these, anticipatory thoughts of what could happen, what ifs. And so that's really when I started to notice it having like an impact in school and stuff.
I definitely relate to that because 5th grade is when, I think it maybe started in 4th with me, not my Tourette, but me being really, I guess, sensitive to it and having a difficult time, not wanting to be at the center. When you said, I kind of thought this is where you were going about like picking out a seat in class to where, it was relevant to you, but you were kind of out of the way. I always did that so strategically of where I was going to sit on the bus or who I was going to sit near, who I felt vulnerable around. And, and even what I said, because I was a shrimpy little kid and much smaller than a lot of the people who I went to school with. And so I was already kind of vulnerable in that regard. But when it came to like my anxiety and sensitivities, and I would have these anxiety attacks at school where I would just, I would just cry, scared of just something in general, not really specific. I think it was just the fear that someone's going to mess with me, pick on me, beat me up or just something. Even if nothing was going to happen that day and everything's cool, I would freak myself out and go into these crying fits, which would make the whole thing worse because all of a sudden, I'm branded as a crybaby or something. And, I would always be on edge. I would get in fights and, even with like my really good friends, and I can picture their faces right now. I remember all of them from when I was, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade.
Right.
And, I think I still, as a carryover to this day, have some of that in me when it comes to where I'm going to sit, how am I going to kind of be out of the splash zone, so to speak. And with journalism too, when I was writing stories, they were definitely thorough and I like putting detail into them and I like to work and just get the answers to questions, but I was very guarded about kind of how I wrote things, language that I used, hoping people wouldn't get furious with me because I phrased something a certain way. I was very, very careful about that kind of thing. And I think I had fears of being sued and everything like that. I mean, like it's really nuts how much just simple anxiety, and it's more complex, I guess, with us. I say simple anxiety, that's not really a thing, but but just its presence in your life governs and plays with all of your actions and decisions and, like how you're going to, I was telling this to one of my friends the other day. It's a free Saturday night. I don't have anything to do. I learned that like my favorite band is coming to town and I can go see them. But then I talk myself out of it because I think about like, where am I going to park? And by the time I get home, it's going to be this hour. And then like, it's just, I add all these drags onto it. And then I just talk myself out of doing it because of the anxiety. when
Totally.
when it's like something I would want to be doing, you know?
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette Syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, tourette.org.
What I found, I don't know, I'm not saying I coined this term, but I think I've heard other people use it before, and I call them kind of like tics of the mind, where like, it's just, you can't get it, and it's really just anxiety, but like kind of at a different level. You really just can't get the thought out of your head. And so when they were younger, it was a lot of like, oh, what if the day's too long? Oh, what if someone makes fun of me? Oh, what if I can't stop ticking?
Yeah.
But now, and kind of very similarly to what you just said about the, when you're filing stories and like not wanting to be sued, like when I have a press release that I need to finish at night, that needs to be sent out, I like to send them at like 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning. So it's reporters' first things to see.
Yeah.
But when I have to go to bed and schedule it beforehand, like, the amount of times I check it just, to make sure that it's, all the links are right, all the spacing is right, everything I'm saying is right. Like, It is just, it can be so stressful, especially, on high level campaigns. I mean, and I was rolling out big endorsements. I was rolling out, rebuts to attacks, all that types of things. And I think it added a level of just a lot more anxiety, I think, than needed. Definitely, and I haven't messed one of those up yet, but I know in my life I will mess one of those up. It's bound to happen.
Yeah.
And so I definitely feel that. And I think I also, what you were saying about, your band and those events, I think for me, a lot of it is like, I don't obsess necessarily over like where will I park when when I'm late, I'll get to home. For me, it's like, I guess it's changed a little bit, but it's always been a little bit like, what ifs, but not what is related to like myself. And so like, oh, what if my tics are so bad that I can't say the whole time, or what if, X happens or Y happens or Z, whatever it is. But I definitely feel that like, it's just, I talked myself out of so many things that I genuinely wanted to do that I just didn't do. And I think I actually had a kind of a realization. I think this was really middle of junior year, where a lot of political events that I actually otherwise really wanted to go to, and I also had pretty bad social anxiety. Yeah, I just wouldn't go to, and I think there was a point in junior year where I was like, this is clearly a career, and I don't actually see what I'm doing right now as a career. It's just something that I like doing. I'm very ready to go to college and take a break. But
yeah.
What I found is that it's something that I really like, in a community that I really like, and like I need to force myself and make myself step out of the comfort zone. And so I started going to more events, and I started really just pushing myself, even though it was uncomfortable, and trying to like put aside the what ifs that came up.
Yeah, and actually, it occurs to me, for any of my friends listening who are like, "Wait a minute, you're at a lot of shows." I always drove myself, so I could leave at the time I wanted to. I remember I wouldn't always say bye to people if I was leaving early, because of the whole like, oh, you can't leave, or just the ceremoniousness of like saying bye to a million people,
Yeah.
I would just disappear because of the anxiety of all that too. I'm just now recalling all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, what? Like, I did that? Like, what did they think of me? And like,
yeah, no, I totally feel that. I mean, I think like, me too. It was really hard actually. So the first campaign ever I worked on, it was election night, and I don't know how you'll do in a freshman, 14 or 15. So I couldn't drive. And my parents, I think I got picked off by like a campaign, someone who I got picked up from school from someone else on the campaign. It was election day. And so from like 3 to 7, I was at a polling location passing, flyers or whatever. And then I went to the candidate's house for our election night party. And my parents came at like 8:30 to come pick me up, but we didn't have the results yet. We ended up losing by 100 votes. But what I found was that for the first time in my life, I was actually okay with staying longer. And my parents outside, even though they were annoyed by the fact that I was truly 2 hours past the time they asked me to pick them up, they were like, this is the first time Eli is actually, okay with staying longer, okay with not having that control, okay with, all these things. So in a very weird way, and I still do it. I mean, like what you said, like I will drive myself instead of take the bus or take the train.
Yeah.
And when that was now COVID, obviously. But I will drive myself to events still because I like to have that control. But what I found is actually that through these campaigns, you often didn't have a choice. You just kind of had to stay. And so through these campaigns, I learned how to make it okay. And, whether that was like taking a walk during the middle of it to, just give myself some fresh air, whether that was like, sometimes I would flat out fake a call. That way I could just like get my mind in a different space and like pretend I was on a phone call, but not actually talk to anyone. Just to, find ways to make it a little bit more bearable.
Yeah, I think I've done that too. I'm sure I have.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you're talking about because I'll do things that sound really contradictory to what I just said, which is I will put myself in positions that are vulnerable to kind of, I don't know if like I'm trying to feel the pain of it. I think I'm just trying to get through it as practice, even though it's a real thing. Like I'm in some situation where I'm vulnerable or I'm doing something by myself when I typically like to have people with me or the opposite or whatever. I think because I just talk so much about kind of ducking out of things out of fear and anxiety, but there are plenty of things like for a while actually for years, I worked in a bar, like checking IDs where people get in fights and, it wasn't my scene, but I was there and I was a total, sore thumb, but I was there and I learned things. Like I exposed my things to, I guess, the kind of jeopardy that I wouldn't have otherwise. And because I think I didn't want to be, at some point I wanted to stop being disappointed in myself for always kind of chickening out. And getting into journalism was, if you're really worried about things, like it's not necessarily the job for you because you have to have thick skin, which I really didn't. You really have to get things right. And, I will be really obsessive, as you were saying about sending out a press release and just looking at it again. I still do that. I send out a political newsletter every Friday and I read that thing 100 million times before it goes out. Yep. And even after it goes out, I look at what went out because I'm like, oh, wait, what if I said can't instead of can? Or what if I said did instead of didn't? Or, just some is possible, that happens. And I'll so freak myself out with that. But I'm so much better about it nowadays after being a reporter covering, I guess, like really intense stuff for like, 10 or more years. Inside the legislative building, super partisan, is North Carolina. Yeah. I mean, this is a political battleground state. And I was working with, I was writing about lobbyist interests and, it's, you don't want to mess up. But the fact that I put myself in these situations and I learned and like, I made mistakes along the way. I had to correct, I don't know how many errors I made. I had to run corrections. Everybody does. But whereas the thought of that would have been so unbearable that I wouldn't have gone to do it, I just kind of jumped in and it's helped me be more spontaneous. And I was talking about this with my friend Haley the other day about I almost plan less now and I almost let spontaneity kind of draw me out and pull me out. And so I can live more by the moment than thinking, what if the plan that I'm trying to adhere to, what if the plan fails? Instead of just not really having a plan and just jumping in and, I'm getting better about doing that. And I'm 40, it's, I'm still climbing up, but I'm getting better because I think I've exposed myself to these things.
Yeah, no, I gotta say, I see a lot of that in myself too. I think, in early campaigns, I would plan everything to the T and I'd be like, at this time, this is going to happen. And for some events, like your candidate needs that. And I would obsess over, whenever I had to go on record, I would obsess over prep for that and, really like write down what I wanted to say and, just really like be very specific. And now actually, and I don't really want to admit this because it's not the best practice like on a campaign, but like for me, what I've actually found is I'm much better when I know my talking points, when I know my messaging, but I actually just talk and I don't do that. And because I think so much of, and I think, you know, we have this in common, like so much of what we're scared of is just stuck in our minds. So that what I found is that when I had more of that, it made my performance, you know, less good. And so I think just the spontaneity, and like sometimes you can't be spontaneous, you know, you can't have spontaneity when you're like talking on record about something like, you know, hard or just, you know, you can't always do that. But what I found is that there are some opportunities where you can, and that made me so much better at doing it. It's just one of those things that kind of like the reverse of everything you would think would be helpful, or wouldn't be helpful is helpful. Like you wouldn't think campaigns like allowed me to actually control my tics better, but like they actually have. You wouldn't think that like the spontaneity would help us, you know, do it better, but it actually has. And so it's an interesting kind of mind game in a way.
Yeah. That brings another thing to mind, because I did radio for a while, and I would always script myself because I was delivering news, and it would be a live radio segment where I would go on as the reporter, and the host would ask me questions, and I would, you know, have my notes, but they're like perfectly written scripts of how I would say things. And, you know, the language that I would use and words that I have an easy time pronouncing and all that. Cause it's like, okay, I got to anticipate what he's going to ask me. I'm going to write a perfect answer to this question that I know is going to come up. And I would just read it straight from the piece of paper. And I guess it kind of sounded like I was reading, but I tried to make it conversational, but I was always kind of let down by how it sounded. And then there were a couple times where I just had to jump to it. No script, no nothing, just off the top of my head. And those were easily my best, you know, performances in terms of sounding fluent and coming up with things that maybe I wouldn't have thought about if I was in the mindset of writing it down and putting up these guardrails around myself. And yeah, it's so interesting. And I think it's good to talk about, because if it doesn't work out and you fail, I think there's still kind of a takeaway. You know, I've screwed up a lot of things, and, you know, just spellings of the last episode of Tourette's podcast, I misspelled Scholastic, ironically. and you know, it burns, you know, when it happens, but I do develop kind of just a better command on what I need to be doing. But what I don't think I need to be doing is patting myself so much that I never fail, or that I never get to breathe fresh air, essentially. I want to expose myself. And it sounds counterintuitive, because it's like, why do you want to fail? I'm like, that's not the point. It's, you know, I want to at least know what's coming. I want to know what things feel like. And because it can, you know, part of the dread that you have in your head is like, what is this going to feel like? Like, oh my gosh, it's like, you know, clamping your eyes shut when you get poked with a hypodermic needle for the first time, you know, or when they draw blood or something. It's going to be the worst thing ever. Then when it happens, it's like, okay, not so bad. It's just you expose yourself, and then you end up having a frame of reference for processing or something like that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's just one example of, I was with my dad on the way to my grandma's house, my grandparents' house for dinner. And it was in the heat of the campaign I mentioned when I was a comm director for Yoni Pizer. And there was a lot of heat surrounding him because he got appointed to the seat. We don't have to go into the specifics. People are not going to be interested in it. It's a Chicago political situation. Anyway, this reporter who is from the Chicago Sun-Times, who just considered she was an editorial writer, just one of the best and hardest hitting, but just really one of the best journalists in the city, calls me and asked me this like question where we messed up. We basically said that Yoni, in Illinois, you don't have to be a full-time legislator. It's a part-time job, which is similar to, I think, a lot of other states.
Yeah, North Carolina.
Yeah. I think most states are actually like that, which is problematic, but also fine. Again, we don't have to get into that. But one forum, Yoni said he was going to be a full-time legislator. Then in another forum, he said that he wasn't going to be. And this reporter called me, and, you know, I hadn't known what she was going to ask me about, which is always kind of the scariest calls to get from reporters. And, you know, you've been on the other side of that. It's probably like your best calls to give to Flax, because, you know, you get us. And so I was actually able to devise this. I don't even remember what I said, because I was so stressed out and so nervous, but I was able to like get us out of it somehow. And I get off the call and my dad goes, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I don't even know what I just did." And then I was like, "But I'm sweating. I got to take my sweatshirt off." And so it was one of those things where just like, it really actually stressed me out, but also, I was able to find a way to get out of it. And because I didn't have all this time to prep and to obsess over the little words and the little things here and there, I was actually able to somehow get us out of this mess. And so I think that like what I learned from that is that, if I don't let that kind of anticipatory anxiety get in the way of everything, sometimes we're actually able to come up with these things that actually, make a lot of sense. I don't suggest it. It could have gone very badly, right? There's a world where like I lose my job over it, but also, we figured it out.
Yeah.
And so it just really taught me that, it kind of goes back to like, even when I was younger, like, oh, what if this happens? Sometimes this did happen. And you know what? Like I was okay also. Right. And so I think it just really reminds us that, yes, the worst possible thing could happen. And also 9 times out of 10, you're going to be fine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's exposing yourself so you know that to be true,
Right.
Right. So you, this is going to be a weird question. So you're kind of a fast talker, and have you always been that way, or because I'm a fast talker too, and I wasn't always that way until I got into journalism and politics. And the reason I did is because you really have like a cigarette paper's width of time to speak. And, and you're working in a lot of cases with very strong personalities. And if you're, kind of soft spoken and slow, then you're going to get kind of, you'll get cut off pretty quickly. So I got used to just kind of getting things out there and talking really quickly, A, to be time efficient, B, so, people would be, I guess, more likely to listen. I really had to kind of like rebuild myself and remodel myself.
That's interesting.
Is that like, is your family a fast talking family, or, because I've asked this of people before and they're like, no, it wasn't until politics that I started talking like this.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts. I think my sister is like the fastest talker I've ever met. And my parents are like, I actually haven't really thought of it, but like we're fast talkers. We're like a big, loud Jewish family. Like we talk a lot and we talk fast. And it's interesting you said, because I was very shy, growing up, and I think I definitely had like a shy, timid voice. Sorry, but except for when I was comfortable around people, and I could really kind of let loose and be comfortable around people. And so what I noticed is that my first 2 campaigns, I was not at all. I kind of went back into the shadow, didn't talk as much. But as I started gaining more confidence, I think I might have even started talking faster. Because like you said, when I'm on strategy calls with people like double my age and people that have done this forever, like they're talking and talking and talking, and I will have, it depends on the campaigns, it depends on the candidate. Some candidates trust young people more than others, but I will have 30 seconds to a minute to get my thoughts in. And so I think it's something that I developed, but like, I also will see, like when I start a new campaign or work with a new candidate, I think I do go back into the talking a little bit slower. And then as I get more comfortable, I think I speed up a little bit just because the confidence is there.
It's sometimes I bounce off maybe I kind of like, and I don't intentionally do this, but sometimes I mirror the person I'm talking to on Tourette's podcast, and I'll talk at their speed or maybe try to use similar language. But again, I say try. I think I just kind of do it. But I definitely noticed talking to you was bringing out the more quick phrasing for me. And
right. When you're talking to someone else that also has similar experience, like when I find like when I'm talking to like friends, I'm probably a little bit slower. When I'm talking to someone in politics, you're like another reporter, or not a reporter. I think you kind of go back into the like same, the same style and the same pace in a way, if that makes sense.
I'm going to try to slow myself down. Let me see if I can do that.
Me too. I'll
just in case anybody's, because somebody might be listening and be like, dude, calm down, like slow down, man.
Yeah.
So, is politics something you're glued to? I mean, do you see that being, is that your foreseeable future? Again, it's so addictive that it's hard to get away from it once you're in it, but, where do you see yourself?
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, I don't know. I'm tired of campaigns right now. I've been on like 5 straight. And I finished a race for Wisconsin State Assembly where I was a campaign manager for a very close state rep race up there. And the day after, I started managing a campaign for back home in Evanston, Illinois. And so I'm tired of it. I need a break. I'm tired of it, and I'm tired, period. And, I don't know. I think everyone assumes, and everyone, I mean, like all my friends and family and just people kind of assume that this is what I'll go into. And like, if I were to take my best guess, I will definitely be in politics in the next, it will be my career. That being said, I'm excited to go to college. I'm excited to a lot. I really enjoyed high school. I had great friends. I had a lot of fun. And politics really took over. And it became a huge part of my life and definitely got in the way of, your quote unquote, not got in the way, actually, that's a bad way to describe it, but it took the place of your quote unquote normal high school experience, whatever that means.
Right.
And I still had a lot of those, great friends and, hanging out on Saturday nights and all that stuff. But there were times where I was so busy that I couldn't. And I think I had a very unique high school experience where I'm ready to go to college in the fall, again, after this year is over, to just do something different. And, try new things and meet new people. And then most likely, I'll end up back working in politics. There's people that already want me to work on the races for the Chicago municipal election coming up in 2023. And I'm like, I'm still going to be in college, but okay. It's so addicting, and it's so hard to get out of, especially when like you develop relationships with people that end up running for things or try to get a different seat. That it's just, these people aren't just colleagues, right? The amount of time we spend working together, they are some of my closest friends and people that I trust the most. And yes, sometimes they're double my age. But it's just a very hard thing to get out of, for better or for worse. So, my best guess is that I will, but I kind of want some time to see where life takes me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also an educational experience in itself, just because you learn so much. Like, you have to learn just something about every issue and how it's going to play out. And it's a really enlightening field to be in, and sometimes scary for that reason too. But you at least have this knowledge edge. Is I think that's one of the most addicting things for me, because I'm a learning junkie and I like to know how things work. And, you really do get a front row seat to so many things. If you know what's going on in local politics, you probably know what's going on in state legislative politics and, in turn federal, because everything kind of speaks to one another. Yeah. And things work in very similar ways. And it's very difficult to pull yourself from something where you are, kind of given this, it's almost like it serves itself up to you, just these secrets of the world in a way. But what do you see yourself doing, or what's the plan for college and your concentrations and all that?
Yeah. So I'm going to Brandeis University out in Boston. You don't go in declared, major, but I'd assume I'm going to study politics. So that's really all I have planned right now. My race hopefully will end in February. It's one of those primary races where if a candidate gets more than 50%, they win. That might just be a thing in Illinois, but I think it's a thing elsewhere as well. But that's kind of it. I'll probably end up doing something else before I leave in the fall. But again, we'll probably still focus on politics. Probably want to get minor in journalism, or communications as well. But other than that, those are my plans for now.
That's cool. That's a lot. I liked how we talked about all of this. I mean, we kind of anchored it around, working in the field of politics and the sense of personality that's in it, the anxiety, working with other people and in a sensitive environment with Tourette. I mean, that's something a lot of people can relate to. But I mean, is there anything I didn't ask about that you think's important, or something that I got us off track of? Another thing I'd like you to address, I guess, for anybody listening who is interested in this kind of field, do you have any suggestions for people to kind of dip their toe into this world if this is something they want to get into?
Yeah. No, I mean, nothing we missed. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think that the two biggest things for me is that, and I talked about this in the beginning, but in a weird way, like politics and Tourette's for me, and campaigns and Tourette's for me, like, are just so connected. because it really was the thing that allowed me to really burst out of my shell and be okay with being a little bit different, or be okay with the what ifs. And so, I guess the lesson that I learned, and specifically, like if someone listening has Tourette's, or knows someone with Tourette's, or is in the Tourette community for some way, like, take the step into politics. I promise you it's going to be okay. Again, even if the worst thing happens, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be okay. Take the leap, contact your local elected official, get involved in some way, knock on doors, run for office even. Hey, I mean, like, there's so many opportunities to get involved. And just taking that first step is always the hardest. But once you do, I promise you, you will find the next thing to do. And I think, again, like, also what we talked about, Ben, like, the weirdest things, and this kind of relates to even if just life in general with Tourette, like, the weirdest things can explain a lot about Tourette's for you. And they did for me. And so, again, like, I never would have thought that a political campaign would have taught me so much about myself in this way. But it did. And so when you think, oh, this is going to be so hard, or I'm not going to be able to do this, again, like, take that leap, because, you're going to be able to do it. But the one other thing that actually, I had in my mind, that I want to bring up is, I think the other day, Ted Cruz or something said a really, I don't know what he said, but he made a joke about Tourette, and my friend who actually works on campaigns retweeted it and said something about it. And I found your podcast by, like, doing research into, like, I heard of someone make a dumb joke about Tourette, some, like, elected official or something. But it's just remarkable how, I mean, first of all, Ted Cruz, I can't wait. I think he's up again in 2024, and I want to take another year out of college to make sure he loses, for many reasons. But, like, it's just remarkable how many people still make fun of it. And I think that, it's really, I mean, I think for the only way that we change that is for people with it, to speak up, especially for the people that can't. And to say it's just wrong. And I was really, heartened to see a lot of people talk back to him. And again, I don't remember what he said, but it was just like a Ted Cruz level of disgusting that just, like, took it to a whole new level. And, I think just people really need to, our country's at a weird place, and people really need to, continue to speak up against it. Especially when people with power, take advantage / make fun of us. So yeah, that was another thing that kind of was on my mind.
No, it's true. I mean, I was really, even though it was Ted Cruz and he's known for, saying the things he says,
right,
I was still kind of stunned, because I think it was Representative Issa said something right before that too, where he said that Donald Trump has political Tourette's or something like that. Yeah. And, it's I don't care what party you're from. I mean, if you make a joke like that, like, you need to be, because again, this is something that affects kids, and if you just think about, and trigger warning here, I mean, with the suicide rate and the just how horrible bullying can be, and just it's completely different. I don't think Tourette is completely off limits to have some fun with, among ourselves and at a level that we're comfortable with.
100%.
But when it comes to just using it as something to stand on for a cheap joke, and it's something that, you're in representative government, you're one of only 2 U.S. senators in your state. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how you conduct yourself. That's just really sorry. And, and again, it could be a Republican, could be a Democrat. People just make this joke, and I guess not to pull in other disorders or anything like that, but I can just think of other things that people are diagnosed with, that if he had made the same kind of joke and referenced another kind of disorder or another kind of syndrome, then, like, oh my God, like, the fallout from that. And, and I'm sure he would have a programmed mind to not even go there, but Tourette is just still kind of low on the shelf. And
I don't get it, right? Again, what you said, and it's not like the war of, like, who's going to use the disorder or syndrome, whatever it is, it's everything is equally bad, but it's just like, I remember watching a movie and seeing a joke about it. I mean, I've had friends that make jokes about it to my face, not knowing that I had it. Again, that's a different situation, but, like, just the amount of that it's used is just really, really astounding. And again, like there was public outcry, but like there wasn't really, again, compared to what other people said. There was like a tweet that went around.
Right.
And that, in my opinion, like the network should have been talking about that because of what you said and because of all the things that we've been talking about. Like it's just really astounding.
Well, and just so nobody gets me wrong, I'm not saying that other disorders always go free and avoid this kind of thing. I mean, there are plenty of other diagnoses that do get ridiculed and do find their way into jokes. And so I know Tourette is not completely unique in that regard, but just the rhythm of it is still really surprising to me. And but that's why, like we're having this conversation. It's there are people who listen to Tourette's podcast who don't have Tourette at all. It's not in their family or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad they are, because it's a different kind of conversation than you would typically hear. I guess it's usually framed in a different way, or it's just the pop culture way. And right. So just the amount of stuff I do see out there online with people just kind of enterprising, doing really great advocacy work, TikTok channels, things like that. Like, yeah, I'm sure they're getting the mix of bullying in with that, but just the repetition of it and how much is out there is helping to move the needle and get us closer to a different kind of understanding, or a different level of understanding about what Tourette is in the public mind. And I just, still a long way to go, but it's working.
And on that, my friend actually a few months ago sent me one of those TikToks, and just because of, I think, how a lot of our minds work, I thought that person was making fun of it. And I texted her back and I was like, this is awful. And she's like, no, look at the other one. Like, this person is actually being an advocate. And I was like, it's just so sad that that's where my mind goes, because it's so commonplace. And so it is really great to see people stepping up and talking about it and calling it out.
Thanks for listening. Thanks to Eli. That was a lot of fun. Lots of brain things to relate to. Tell me what hit for you. Like, what did you relate to? Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com, or better yet, head to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook and throw it up there. And by all means, join if you haven't already. We have one more episode this season. That's crazy. Thanks so much to the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org, for continuing to be the primary sponsor of Tourette's Podcast. They've been such a lift because, it's hard to give the podcast the attention and resources it needs under the growth it's experienced. And that's where the Tourette Association has come in. One of the ways they've come in. They've been very broadly helpful. Anyway, they keep this thing fueled, along with individual contributors via patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast. And that's just a place where you can give small donations to the show. Really helps. The season has really gotten to the next level in terms of listener involvement, and I can't thank you enough. Remember to send in your science questions. I want to bring that closer to you, the connection between you, your Tourette, and the people responsible for knowing what we know about it. There might be a lot more scientific knowledge about it than you think, and we're going to be covering that. Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com or the contact form at Tourette'sPodcast.com to send your science questions in. That's going to do it for this episode. We'll be right back for the finale of Season 6. I'll talk to you then. Thanks, everybody. This is Ben.